In this video, we will demonstrate how to prepare the Agar bridges used in the towed epithelial transport class. You will need 3 molar potassium chloride, a beaker, and 4 grams of agar. Place the agar into the beaker. Then measure out 100 ml of 3 molar potassium chloride. Place the beaker into a microwave and set it for 1 minute. You should wear gloves when retrieving the beaker, as it may be very hot. If the agar has not quite melted, as shown here, you can put it back into the microwave for another 10 to 20 seconds or so. Agar melts at 85 degrees Celsius, but then doesn't gel again until about 40 degrees Celsius, so you will need to work quickly when making the agar bridges. And be careful, as the agar will still be very hot. The agar bridges are made in these P2023 electrode tips from a company called Physiologic Instruments. To fill the tips with agar, as you have to work quickly, make sure you have some tips laid out on the table next to you. Then this is the bit where you have to work quickly so you can fill the tips before the agar sets. Draw some agar up into a 5 ml syringe and dislodge any air bubbles. It is extremely important not to introduce any air bubbles into the agar bridges, as air bubbles can prevent the agar bridges from working at all. To fill an electrode tip, place the narrow end into the 5 ml syringe and gently fill the electrode tip to about 7 millimeters. If you go too far, you can draw some of the agar back out again. It's important not to overfill the tips, as when the students assemble the electrodes, you do not want the electrodes to touch the agar in the tips. You will need about 120 agar bridges per class, made up of the 100 used by the students plus 20 spares. There are 4 epithelial transport classes altogether that use the agar bridges, so therefore we will need to make up approximately 500 agar bridges each year. As you make each bridge, lay it onto the bench coat to allow it to cool and set. This is an example of a tip with some air bubbles in it. This particular one is easy to see as the bubbles are large and in the larger part of the tip. You will also find bubbles forming in the narrow part of the tip. These can be the hardest to spot, but they're the most important ones to spot, as they can completely stop the electrode from working. You will find that you start to get a lot of bubbles once the agar cools and begins to set. When it starts doing this, it's worth reheating the agar, A, to prevent it from setting, but also it will make it easier to prevent the bubbles. To reheat the agar, place it into the microwave for another 10 to 30 seconds, depending on what you need. Then continue to fill the tips until you have as many as you need. Once you have done this, we leave the tips on the bench to set for about 30 minutes. Once the agar has set, then what we need to do is to fill the tips with 3 molar potassium chloride solution. Take a transfer pipette and then gently fill the agar bridge with potassium chloride solution, being sure to remove any bubbles. To remove the bubbles, just flick the tip with your fingers and then refill with solution as necessary. When you have filled the tips, place them into a sealable container containing 3 molar potassium chloride, and these will be then stored in the fridge until use. It should be noted that the agar bridges can be used repeatedly, certainly within a given week of classes. However, used electrodes are often prone to growing fungus, and so therefore should only be used for a single week. Once the classes have finished, the agar in the tips can be softened with boiling water and then removed using a syringe. The tips can then be left to dry and then stored until the next year.